He mocked his bride for being too poor. Then a lawyer crashed the wedding with a will that changed everything, and for a moment, every guest forgot how to breathe. The cathedral glowed under tall stained glass windows, the kind that make even the air feel expensive. Guests whispered behind silk fans and polished cufflinks, trading quiet comments about the grandest wedding of the season. Everyone believed they were about to witness a perfect union, wealth, beauty, legacy. And, trust me, none of them suspected the storm waiting at the front pews. The ceremony had just begun when the tension shifted, so subtly at first it felt like a breeze passing through the aisles. The groom, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, leaned toward his bride. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His words came out soft, but sharp enough for the two closest rows to hear. "Try not to embarrass me today," he murmured, adjusting her veil like she was a child who didn't belong there. "Everyone can already tell you don't fit in." A few gasps slipped from the guests. The bride blinked, her breath catching, her hands trembling around the bouquet she had chosen so carefully. She whispered nothing back, not because she agreed, but because humiliation hits hardest when spoken at the altar, beneath 1,000 watching eyes. Honestly, she stayed calmer than I ever could. The priest cleared his throat. The groom straightened. The bride's pulse thundered in her ears. Somewhere in the crowd, someone muttered, "Poor girl, he didn't have to say it like that." But just as the vows were about to begin, just as the bride lifted her eyes and tried to gather the last pieces of her dignity, the massive wooden doors at the back of the cathedral burst open with a deep, echoing crack. Every head turned. A man in a dark suit strode down the aisle, holding a thick leather folder marked with a golden seal. His steps were firm, urgent, unmistakably official. The groom's face drained of color. The bride's bouquet slipped slightly in her hands. The man raised his voice, letting it roll through the vaulted ceiling. "Stop this wedding immediately. I'm here on behalf of the late Mr. Hawthorne, with his final will." Whispers exploded like sparks. The groom staggered backward. The bride froze. And the entire cathedral fell into a stunned, breathless silence. But to understand why a lawyer would crash a wedding, and why the groom's face turned ghost white at the sight of that will, we need to go back to where this story truly began. Before we dive into how a lawyer ended up stopping a wedding with a will, don't forget to subscribe if you love wedding drama mixed with jaw-dropping twists. Trust me, this story only gets wilder from here. Before she ever stood at that altar, gripping her bouquet to hide her trembling hands, she was simply Lila Hartman, 26 years old, soft-spoken, hardworking, the kind of woman who carried kindness the way other people carry perfume. She lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, worked double shifts at a boutique, and still found time to bring leftover pastries to her elderly neighbor every Sunday. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, gentle, hers. And that's exactly why Elias Hawthorne walked straight into it like a storm disguised as a prince. He was everything she wasn't used to, heir to the Hawthorne real estate empire, confident to the point of arrogance, the kind of man who made waiters stand straighter and strangers check their reflections in the nearest glass. When he smiled, the room seemed to tilt. When he spoke, people listened. Not because he was wise, but because he was wealthy. Lila first met him on a rainy afternoon. She was leaving work, balancing an umbrella, a bag of returns, and a coffee she was definitely about to spill. He stepped out of a chauffeured car right in her path, and she bumped straight into him. Her coffee hit his suit. His assistant gasped. Lila apologized so fast she tripped over her own breath. But Elias just laughed. Not cruelly. Not yet. Just amused, like she was something unexpected in his carefully curated world. "It's just a suit," he said, brushing the droplets off. "Can I at least walk you home as repayment for the near-death experience?" It should have ended there. A polite decline. A goodbye. But Elias had a way of folding himself into someone's life before they realized they'd opened a door. He sent flowers. Dropped by her workplace, just to say hi. Invited her to dinners where waiters wore white gloves. He looked at her like she was some rare, delicate thing he discovered before anyone else noticed. And for a while, he was gentle, charming, attentive. He made her laugh. made her feel seen, made her believe she had stepped into a fairy tale she had never dared to imagine. But every fairy tale with a prince also has a castle. And every castle has doors that should never be opened. Lila's first glimpse into that world came during a dinner at the Hawthorne estate, a sprawling mansion filled with marble floors, priceless art, and staff who moved like ghosts. Elias held her hand proudly as he introduced her to his parents. His mother barely let her finish her greeting. "Oh," Mrs. Hawthorne said, eyes trailing from Lila's shoes to her simple dress. "You're Lila." The tone said the rest. His father was worse. "Hartman," he repeated, as though tasting something sour. "What does your family do again?" Lila smiled shyly. "My parents own a small repair shop." "A repair shop," he echoed to the table, as if broadcasting proof of a personal tragedy. The Hawthornes exchanged glances. Glances that said, "She's not one of us. She never will be." Elias squeezed her hand under the table. But he didn't defend her. Not then. Not later. Not ever. Still, Lila stayed. Because kindness makes people believe they can soften the world just by being gentle enough. She didn't know yet that Elias had inherited his family's obsession with status, like a genetic curse. She didn't know their relationship was only accepted because his grandfather, the late Arthur Hawthorne, actually liked her. She didn't know Arthur saw the rot beneath the family's polished surface. And she definitely didn't know he had written something into his will that would scorch the earth beneath Elias's perfect life. For now, Lila only knew one truth. She loved him. More than she should have. And tragically, he loved the way she made him feel. Not the way she existed. Soon, that difference would cost her everything. At first, the red flags didn't look like red flags. They looked like manners. Like tradition. Like family expectations, wrapped politely enough to pass as normal. But trust me, the Hawthornes never say anything directly. They say it with smiles sharp enough to draw blood. It started at brunch. Lila had barely sat down when Elias's mother, Victoria, gestured to the menu and said, "You may want to choose something lighter, dear. Cameras will be everywhere at the engagement gala, and you want to look your best standing next to Elias." Lila blinked. I wasn't ordering anything heavy." Victoria smiled. The kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. "Oh, of course. Just friendly advice." Friendly. Right. Elias didn't say a word. He didn't even look up from his phone. That was red flag number 1. But Lila, being Lila, laughed it off. She always assumed people were kinder than they actually were. The next one came faster. Elias's father, Gregory, invited them to a small family gathering, just relatives. Except to the Hawthornes, relatives included CEOs, political donors, and people who spoke in dollar signs instead of sentences. Lila wore her best dress, soft lavender, knee-length, elegant in the simplest way. She felt beautiful. Until Gregory looked her up and down and said, That's quaint. Quaint. As if she'd shown up wrapped in discount curtains. Someone nearby whispered, "Wasn't this the girl from the boutique? And her parents fix cars or something?" Well, every family needs charity work. Lila's cheeks burned. She tried to excuse herself, but Elias caught her wrist. "Don't be dramatic," he whispered. "They're just adjusting to you." Adjusting? No. They were dissecting her. Still, she stayed. Because love makes people see insults as misunderstandings. But the worst red flag was neither said nor whispered. It was planned. One evening, while Lila and Elias had dinner at his penthouse, Victoria arrived unannounced. No knock. She simply walked in with the building's elevator key code, like a queen entering her palace. She sat down, folded her hands, and said, "We've arranged for Lila to meet a stylist. And a diction coach. And etiquette training. For the wedding." Lila froze. "A diction coach?" Victoria nodded. "For public events. Elias will be taking on more responsibilities soon. His wife must represent the family properly." Lila blinked, hurt, embarrassed, confused. "I didn't realize I represented anything except myself." Victoria gave that tight, condescending smile again. "And that's exactly what concerns us." Elias didn't defend her. Again. He simply said, "It's normal, Lila. Every woman who marries into a family like mine gets training." Lila whispered, "Every woman? Or just me?" No one answered. That's when the cracks really began to spread. Because Lila wasn't just being judged for her dress, her voice, her background. She was being judged for existing outside their pedigree. They didn't want her to join the family. They wanted her to disappear into it, polished, quiet, obedient. And Elias. He didn't stop it. Not once. He let his family chip away at the girl who loved him more than he deserved. But here's the thing the Hawthornes didn't know. Someone else was watching. Someone who had seen this toxic cycle long before Lila ever stepped into it. The late Arthur Hawthorne. Elias's grandfather. The only truly decent person in that family. And while the living were busy trying to mold Lila into someone she wasn't, Arthur's final will, hidden, sealed, and explosive, was quietly waiting for the exact right moment to strike. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened in quiet moments, subtle shifts that would have gone unnoticed if Lila hadn't begun feeling the weight of them in her chest. Moments when the tone changed, the looks sharpened, and the truth finally began clawing its way to the surface. The first real fracture came during the wedding planning meeting. Lila was sitting beside Elias at a long mahogany table, looking through venue options. She pointed at a beautiful garden near a lake, soft flowers, sunlight, the kind of place she imagined saying vows surrounded by warmth. "I love this one," she said, smiling. "It feels peaceful." Elias's mother barely glanced at it. "No, that one is too modest. The press wouldn't know where to film. And the Hawthorne wedding must reflect the Hawthorne name." Lila swallowed. "What about what reflects us?" Elias exhaled sharply, the way someone sighs at a child asking a question they consider silly. "Lila, let's just be reasonable. My family knows what works best." Reasonable. That word again, always used when someone wants you to shrink. Lila closed the brochure quietly. That was the moment she first felt it. This wedding wasn't hers. She was simply being fitted into it. But the real turning point, the moment that changed everything, came a week later. Lila received a phone call from the boutique owner asking if she'd come in early. When she arrived, a customer was waiting with an expression that could peel paint. "I don't appreciate being lied to," the woman snapped. Lila blinked. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, what happened?" The woman folded her arms. "Your fiancé told me I'd get a 50% discount because I was a friend of the family. When I said that wasn't store policy, he accused me of not understanding how business works. Then he said, and I quote, 'She'll do what I ask because she owes me.'" Lila's stomach dropped. "Owes me." The words rang like bells from a dark tower. She went straight to Elias's penthouse after work, tension knotting her spine. "Why would you tell someone I'd break store policy?" she asked. Elias frowned, confused. "Because she expected a discount. And you work there. You can handle it." "Handle it how, Elias? By lying? By getting in trouble? By risking my job to make you look generous?" He scoffed, leaning back on the expensive leather sofa. "Lila, it's just a boutique. You'll leave once we're married anyway. Why are you acting like it's important?" Because it was important. Not the job, but the dismissal. The assumption that her world was disposable the moment it didn't serve his. "Is that what you think?" she whispered. "That my life only starts once I take your name?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I think," he said slowly, "that you should learn how to adapt. My family has expectations. You can't cling to your old life and expect to fit into ours." There it was. Plain. Sharp. Ugly. He didn't love her for who she was. He loved her as long as she stopped being who she was. Still, this wasn't the breaking point. Not yet. That came when Gregory Hawthorne invited Lila to a private conversation at the estate. She thought it would be about wedding logistics. It wasn't. Gregory sat in his study, the walls lined with books no one had touched in years, the window overlooking acres of manicured land. Lila sat across from him, clasping her hands nervously. "Lila," he began, voice formal, "it's time we discuss the prenuptial agreement." She blinked. "Oh, of course." Gregory slid a stack of papers toward her. Thick. Intimidating. We simply want to protect the family assets. After all, your background doesn't quite prepare you for this level of responsibility." She felt that, like a slap in slow motion. She looked through the pages, and her breath caught. Clause after clause after clause of limitations. Restrictions. Controls. It didn't protect the family. It caged her. This feels extreme," she whispered. Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. "If you truly love Elias, none of these terms should bother you." Lila looked up. "If he loves me, why would these be necessary?" Gregory leaned back. "Because love," he said simply, "isn't the same as trust." And there it was. The truth of the Hawthornes boiled down to one sentence. They didn't trust her. They never had. They never would. But Lila didn't sign. She left, shaking, the papers untouched. And when Elias called later, impatient and annoyed, saying, "Lila, just sign the papers, why make this difficult?" she realized something devastating. She was marrying someone who cared more about protecting his empire than protecting her heart. But the Hawthornes had no idea someone else cared. Someone they had forgotten. Someone whose final act hadn't yet been revealed. A man with enough power and foresight to undo everything they had tried to control. Arthur Hawthorne. The grandfather whose shadow still lingered in those halls. And his will, sealed, unaltered, and legally binding, was about to arrive exactly when the world expected it the least. At the wedding itself. The breaking point didn't arrive quietly. It arrived in front of everyone. At the one event meant to unite two families, not expose their cracks. It was the rehearsal dinner. A grand one, of course. Crystal chandeliers. Imported flowers. Tables set like the royal banquet Elias's mother always pretended she was hosting. Lila had spent the afternoon rehearsing her smile because she knew she'd need it like armor. But she still walked in hopeful, or at least trying to be. She wore a soft champagne dress, simple but elegant, the kind that floated when she moved. She'd even let a stylist do her hair, though the fussing made her uncomfortable. She walked toward Elias, expecting him to take her hand. He didn't. He didn't even look at her. Red flag? No. That was already a whole parade by now. But what came next shattered something in her that had been barely holding together. As dinner began, Gregory Hawthorne stood to make a toast. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To legacy. And to the hope that marriage will elevate both partners." The emphasis on both made several guests turn toward Lila with that polite, suffocating pity she had started recognizing too well. She pressed her hands together under the table. Then Victoria added, loudly enough for every ear, "And to our future daughter-in-law, Lila. May this marriage bring her the refinement and opportunities she's never had before." Some women chuckled. Some covered their mouths to hide smirks. Lila felt the words like stones placed gently, deliberately, on her chest. But Elias. He just lowered his head, pretending not to hear. That was the humiliation they wanted her to feel. But the one that broke her came moments later. As the plates were being cleared, one of Elias's cousins, the kind of trust fund brat who thinks cruelty is a personality trait, leaned across the table and said, "So, Lila, are your parents even coming tomorrow? Or is the dress code too intimidating?" Lila swallowed. "My parents, they're not comfortable around big events, but..." "Oh," the cousin laughed, "right. They fix cars or something. I guess this environment must be overwhelming for everyone." Elias didn't defend her. Again. Of course he didn't. But the true crack, the one that split her entirely, came from the person she least expected. Elias himself. He stood to make a speech. And for a moment, Lila hoped he'd finally say something kind, something real. He tapped his glass, smiling that charming, camera-ready smile. "Thank you all for being here. Tomorrow is the start of a new chapter for me. A chapter that will strengthen our family line and, hopefully, help Lila adjust to the expectations that come with joining us." The room chuckled softly. Lila didn't. Her breath caught. Adjust. That word again. Always that word. "As many of you know," Elias continued, "Lila comes from a humble background. But love is about balance, right? We can guide her, teach her, help her grow into the role." The air left her lungs in a slow, painful rush. He didn't say it maliciously. He said it casually. Like it wasn't deeply degrading. Like it wasn't her life. Like she wasn't standing right there beside him. Guests nodded approvingly, as if he had said something noble. Someone clapped. Lila's vision blurred. She heard a woman whisper, "At least she's pretty. Poor, but pretty." And that was it. That was the moment the quiet cracks turned into fractures. She pushed her chair back. It scraped loudly across the marble floor, loud enough to silence an entire room. Elias looked at her at last. "Lila? Sit. Don't make a scene." Those words. Don't make a scene. The same tone a handler uses on a misbehaving pet. Lila's hands trembled. Her throat tightened. Something inside her broke so precisely it almost felt like relief. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm not making a scene. I'm leaving one." And she walked out. Just like that. Past the tables. Past the stairs. Past the chandeliers and the whispered judgments. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just left. Because humiliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet exit with your dignity clutched tightly in both hands. And behind her, Elias didn't follow. He didn't call her name. He simply watched her walk away like she was a problem that would fix itself by morning. He had no idea she was walking out of more than the dinner. She was walking out of his control. And into the arms of the one person who would change everything. Lila didn't know where her feet were taking her. She only knew she had to get away from the clinking glasses, the forced smiles, the polished cruelty of the Hawthornes. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone path outside the estate, echoing like tiny cracks splitting open her chest. Cold air hit her skin. Finally, the tears came. Quiet ones. The kind you release only when you're sure no one is looking. But someone was looking. She heard footsteps behind her, fast, careful, familiar. "Lila." She turned. And there he was, the one person who had always treated her like a human being instead of a social project. Jonah Rivera. Elias's childhood friend turned corporate attorney. The only member of the Hawthorne circle who had ever looked her in the eyes without evaluating her. He wasn't dressed like the others, either. His suit was simple, understated. His expression sincere, not sculpted. And the concern in his voice, it wasn't for show. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer. "I saw you leave. Are you okay?" Lila tried to answer, but her throat tightened painfully. Jonah didn't push. He simply took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. Honestly, between us, every story needs someone like Jonah, the kind of person whose kindness doesn't flare loudly, but glows steadily like a lantern. "Let's walk," he suggested. They moved down the garden path, silent at first. The night smelled like cut grass and expensive perfume drifting from the open windows. Lila wiped her cheeks, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have walked out. It was childish." Jonah stopped walking. "Childish," he repeated, brow furrowing. "Lila, what they did in there wasn't tradition or family culture. It was disrespect. And Elias let it happen." Her breath hitched. Hearing it spoken out loud made something inside her collapse and straighten at the same time. She hugged herself. "I thought things would get better once they got to know me." Jonah's voice softened. Almost painfully. "They're not trying to know you. They're trying to change you." Lila looked away, blinking fast. "I feel so small around them." Jonah gently tapped her chin so she'd look at him. "Lila, listen to me carefully." His voice was steady, grounding. "You are not the small one in that room. They are. People who measure worth by bank accounts always shrink when faced with someone genuine." Her eyes filled again, not with shame this time, but relief. Because someone finally saw her. Fully. They sat on a stone bench beneath a willow tree. Jonah gave her time. Let her talk. Let her unravel the knots she'd been tightening for months. She told him about the prenuptial agreement. The etiquette training. The comments. The laughter. The speech that broke her. And when she finished, Jonah shook his head slowly. "I knew Elias was arrogant," he said quietly, "but I didn't realize he'd become his parents." She swallowed. "He wasn't always like this." "I believe you," Jonah said. "But love isn't measured by who someone used to be. It's measured by who they are when you need them. A beat of silence settled between them, not heavy, just honest. Then Jonah added, almost reluctantly, "You deserve more than this. More than him." Lila didn't answer. She couldn't. Because for the first time, she wondered if he was right. Jonah exhaled, steadying himself. "Do you want me to call someone? Take you home? Stay with you until you feel safe?" Her voice cracked. "Could you just stay a little?" His expression softened. "As long as you need." They sat together, the night quiet around them, like the world was holding its breath for her. And somewhere between the hush of the garden and the warmth of Jonah's jacket around her shoulders, Lila started to feel the smallest flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Herself. She wasn't healed. She wasn't ready. She wasn't suddenly fearless. But she wasn't alone anymore. And she had no idea, absolutely none, that Jonah would soon become the key to uncovering the truth the Hawthornes had buried for years. A truth that had been locked inside one final document. Arthur Hawthorne's will. Lila didn't sleep that night. Not because she was replaying the humiliation. She was past that point now. It was something else. A whisper under her ribs that wouldn't quiet. Something Jonah said kept echoing. "They're not trying to know you. They're trying to change you." And worse. He's become his parents. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. What if the Hawthornes' treatment of her wasn't the only thing Elias had been hiding? It was a dangerous thought. Painful. But once it lodged itself in her mind, she couldn't shake it loose. The morning came with a knot of dread twisting through her stomach. When Jonah texted, "Let me know you got home safe," she hesitated, then replied, "Can we talk today?" He arrived at her apartment an hour later, coffee in hand, eyes gentle but sharp. The kind of eyes that miss nothing. "I've been thinking," she said, voice quiet. "Something doesn't add up." Jonah sat across from her at the small kitchen table. "Tell me." Lila swallowed hard. "Arthur Hawthorne liked me. He treated me like a person. He said I reminded him of someone he loved long ago." Jonah nodded slowly. "I remember. He liked you more than he liked most of his own family." "That's the thing," Lila whispered. "He died before he could come to the engagement party. And ever since his death, everything changed. Elias changed. His parents pushed harder. It's like something disappeared with him." Jonah's jaw tightened, not with anger, but recognition. "Lila," he said carefully, "there's something I've never told you. Something I probably should have." She held her breath. Jonah continued, lowering his voice. "Before Arthur died, he called me. Asked me to review something for him. A legal document. He wouldn't let anyone else see it. Not Gregory. Not Victoria. Not Elias." Lila blinked. "A document? What kind?" Jonah hesitated. "A will." Her pulse thudded in her throat. Arthur had written a new will? Without telling his own family? Jonah nodded. "I reviewed parts of it, but he never finalized the distribution. He said he'd add the signatures soon, then seal it, and that I'd know when to deliver it." A chill ran across Lila's skin. "But Jonah," she whispered, "why would he keep it from them?" Jonah let out a slow breath. "Because Arthur didn't trust them." The words landed with the weight of truth. He knew how they treated anyone outside their social tier. He knew how they pressured Elias. And he said something else, something that stuck with me. Lila leaned forward. "What?" Jonah met her eyes, steady and sure. "The money has corrupted my bloodline," he told me. "But I won't let it corrupt theirs too." "Theirs." The word hit her like a strike of lightning. Her voice trembled. "He meant me." Jonah nodded. "I think he meant to protect you legally, financially, emotionally. And I think his will contains something the Hawthornes absolutely do not want you to see." Lila felt her breath catch. "If that's true, then why hasn't it surfaced? Where is it?" Jonah's expression darkened. "That's the problem. After Arthur's death, Gregory and Victoria locked down every legal document connected to the estate. They used private lawyers, not the firm Arthur trusted. And the copy I had access to wasn't complete." He paused. "Arthur told me I'd know when it was time to deliver the final will. But it never arrived." For a long, heavy moment, Lila said nothing. Then she whispered, "Do you think they hid it?" Jonah didn't answer right away. That alone was an answer. I think, he said finally, there's something in that will that would upend the entire Hawthorne empire. Something big enough that they would bury it at any cost. Lila felt the truth settle inside her like a stone dropping into deep water. All those comments about her place. The pressure to sign the prenup. The desperation to shape her image. The sudden urgency around the wedding. Elias's shift into something less human, more controlled. It all fit. A family protecting something they didn't want her to inherit. Her voice came out small. Jonah, what do I do? He reached across the table and took her hand, not romantically, but with the steady grounding of someone who refuses to let her drown. You find the truth. And you don't do it alone. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, worn, slightly crumpled, edges faded. What is that? She whispered. He pushed it toward her. The parts of Arthur's will he did finalize. The parts one managed to keep. Lila opened it, slowly, carefully, as if the pages might burn her fingers. Her breath caught. Her eyes filled. Jonah watched her face, then said gently, Lila, you need to know this. Nothing about you is ever the problem. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Because the first line of Arthur's document read, to Lila Hartman, who possesses the character this family has long forgotten. Her vision blurred. Jonah continued, and that's just the beginning. Lila swallowed hard, a mix of dread and strength rising in her chest. For the first time in months, she felt the shift. Not just emotionally, but legally. Something big was coming. Something the Hawthornes couldn't control. Something that would walk straight into that cathedral and turn the wedding into a battlefield of truth. And Lila, quiet, gentle, underestimated Lila, was no longer walking blind. The days after Jonah handed her the partial will felt strangely quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Lila didn't rush. For the first time in months, she didn't feel pressured to behave, to adapt, to shrink. She simply let herself stop. She stayed in her apartment, wrapped in Jonah's jacket, staring at the pages Arthur had signed. His words echoed through her mind like gentle thunder. A character this family has long forgotten. She read that line over and over until the ache in her chest loosened. It wasn't validation. It was recognition. The first step in rebuilding wasn't strength, it was honesty. And Lila finally admitted something she had been too afraid to say aloud. She wasn't happy. She hadn't been for a long time. The Hawthornes hadn't taken her happiness overnight. They had stolen it piece by piece. And she had let them. But she wasn't letting them anymore. The first week, she focused on breathing again. She took long walks around the city, letting the cool air clear her thoughts. She stopped at her favorite bakery and bought herself a pastry without worrying whether the calories were appropriate for a bride. She sat on park benches, listening to children laugh and dogs bark. Sounds she'd forgotten could feel comforting. Small things. But they mattered. Because rebuilding doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with remembering you exist outside the expectations of others. The second week, she returned to work at the boutique. Her manager hugged her tighter than she expected. You look lighter, she said softly. Different. In a good way. And she was right. Lila wasn't smiling out of obligation. She wasn't walking on eggshells. She wasn't apologizing for breathing too loudly. She worked calmly, steadily. Clients noticed. Some even complimented her style, her patience, her eye for detail. Her confidence returned quietly, like sunlight warming a room through open curtains. At night, she reread Arthur's document. Not seeking answers, but reassurance. Because the truth wasn't just about what the Hawthornes had hidden. It was about who Arthur believed she was. And slowly, Lila started believing it too. The third week, Jonah checked on her again. He found her reorganizing her apartment. Boxes on the floor, curtains half removed, shelves rearranged. What are you doing? He asked, amused. Making space, she said. For what? For myself. Jonah smiled, soft, proud, relieved. Good, he said. It's about time. They sat on the couch with cups of hot tea, not talking about Elias, not talking about the wedding, not talking about the will. Just talking. About normal things. Real things. Jonah had a quiet steadiness that made Lila feel grounded. He didn't push her. He didn't steer her. He didn't try to fix her pain. He let her heal at her own pace. Honestly, that alone was healing. The fourth week, she allowed herself something new. Hope. She started sketching dresses again, something she hadn't done in years. Not for work. Not for clients. For herself. Gentle fabrics. Soft lines. Colors that felt like breathing. She pinned them on her wall, one by one, until her apartment looked less like a wound and more like a beginning. Jonah saw them once and froze. "You're talented, Lila." She shrugged shyly. "It's just a hobby." "It looks like a future," he said. And maybe it was. Months passed. Little by little, the pieces of her life came together. She saved more money, took on more shifts, made new friends at the boutique, spent occasional evenings with Jonah talking about everything but the Hawthornes. And while she rebuilt, the anxiety about Arthur's missing final didn't vanish, but it no longer hollowed her out. It simply waited. Quietly. Like the last puzzle piece of a story she wasn't ready to finish yet. But life has a way of bringing closure to those who seek truth. And one crisp evening, just when Lila felt stable, not perfect, not fearless, but stable, Jonah knocked on her door with a look she'd never seen before. A look that said, everything is about to change. Because the missing piece of Arthur's will had finally surfaced. And its timing? Oh, trust me. The Hawthornes would soon wish it hadn't. Second chances don't arrive with fireworks. They slip in quietly, the way sunrise enters a dark room, soft, patient, certain. For Lila, that sunrise had a name. Jonah. But let's be very clear. He wasn't a rebound. He wasn't a replacement. He wasn't a prize for surviving pain. He was simply someone who saw her. In a way no one from the Hawthorne family ever had. It began subtly. After the night he arrived with the news that Arthur's missing documents were finally located, he stayed a while longer than usual. Long enough for Lila to make tea. Long enough for the tension in her chest to ease. Long enough for something warm, unhurried, to take shape between them. They sat on the couch, the box of recovered documents resting between them like a fragile secret. "You don't have to open it tonight," Jonah said softly. Lila shook her head, staring at the seal she hadn't yet cracked. "I know, but just knowing it exists is enough for now." Jonah nodded. He didn't push. He didn't coax. He didn't fill the silence with explanations or advice. He let her feel whatever she felt. And honestly, that was the exact moment she realized she wasn't used to people who gave her space instead of taking it. Over the next few weeks, Jonah became a quiet thread woven into her rebuilding. Some days he stopped by the boutique with coffee. Not the sugary, complicated kind the Hawthornes judged her for, but the exact one she liked. "You looked tired yesterday," he'd say. "So I figured you'd need this." Other days he helped at her apartment, fixing a loose shelf, adjusting curtain rods, carrying boxes she pretended weren't heavy. He never hovered. Never assumed. Never made her feel like she owed him something. He simply made existing feel easier. And Lila, who had spent a year tiptoeing around fragile egos and judgmental expectations, started to breathe differently around him. Not cautiously, but naturally. Still, Lila wasn't naive. She knew she wasn't ready for romance. Not yet. Not while her past still had pieces that needed placing. Jonah understood that too. One evening, while they walked back from the corner market, he said, "I don't want you to think I'm expecting anything from you." Lila looked at him, surprised. "I didn't think you were." "Good," he said softly. "Because I'm not. If all we ever are is two people who survived bad things and learned from them, that's enough." Her chest warmed. No pressure. No timeline. No performance. Just two people healing in parallel. But the truth? Second chances don't ask for permission. They grow where they find warmth. And warmth existed between them long before either of them admitted it. Proof? It came one rainy afternoon at the boutique. Lila was closing up when Jonah arrived without his usual calm. "Something happened," he said, breath uneven. Lila's heart jumped. "What's wrong?" He handed her an envelope, thin, white, official-looking. "This isn't from the Hawthorns," he said. "It's from Arthur's personal attorney, the one who handled the confidential matters." Lila stared at it. Her fingers trembled. Jonah reached out instinctively, gently covering her hand with his. Not grabbing. Not guiding. Just studying. "You're not alone," he said softly. "I'm right here." Those 5 words settled into her like a truth she hadn't expected. She trusted him. Not because he rescued her. Not because he was gentle. Not because he was different. But because he didn't ask her to become anything but herself. She didn't open the envelope that night. Or the next. But she did something else. She invited Jonah to stay for dinner. Not a romantic one. Not candlelit. Not symbolic. Just 2 bowls of pasta. Music playing softly from her tiny speaker. Laughter that didn't feel borrowed. Halfway through the meal, Jonah glanced at one of her dress sketches pinned on the wall. "You should design wedding gowns," he said casually. Lila nearly choked on her food. "Wedding gowns?" He nodded. "You understand women's stories. You'd make dresses that feel like truth, not costumes." She looked at him, really looked, and the strangest thing happened. For the first time since she left the Hawthorns, the word wedding didn't hurt. Not because she wanted one, but because she wasn't afraid of it anymore. Jonah didn't notice the shift in her expression, but Lila did. It was the kind of shift that meant her heart was healing faster than she realized. And that healing mattered more than anything. Because soon, very soon, the recovered documents would demand her attention. And when they did, Lila would discover that Arthur Hawthorne didn't just leave her a message. He left her a bombshell. One that would expose every lie the Hawthorne family built their legacy on. And bring her right back to the wedding aisle she had escaped. But this time, she wouldn't be standing there alone. Vindication doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet victories. The kind only the healed version of yourself can recognize. For Lila, the shift began before she even knew it. She wasn't chasing survival anymore. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't waiting for the Hawthorns to give her permission to exist. She was building a life. One stitch, one sketch, one brave choice at a time. Her boutique, once a timid little shop with mismatched hangers and borrowed mannequins, started changing almost overnight. Word spread. Not because she had money. Not because she had connections. But because her designs felt different. Authentic. Soft, but powerful. Clothes that made women feel seen, not judged. A local magazine wrote a small piece about her. Up-and-coming designer creates clothing with heart. Then came more clients. Then a gallery request to feature her fabric sketches. Then a high-end boutique asking for a collaboration. She worked long nights, music low, tea cooling beside her, pencil marks smudging her fingers. One evening, she paused mid-sketch, realizing something that made her chest tighten. She wasn't designing to prove anything anymore. Not to the Hawthorns. Not to society. Not to the people who once whispered she was marrying up. She was designing because she loved it. The world saw the change in her before she did. Her smiles lasted longer. Her voice carried differently. Her steps had purpose instead of apology. Even Mara noticed. "You're glowing in a way that has nothing to do with revenge," she said one morning while steaming dresses. Lila laughed softly. "Well, revenge isn't really my color anyway." "Exactly," Mara said. "But success? That looks perfect on you." And honestly, it did. But the universe wasn't finished with her yet. The real vindication. The one she didn't expect, didn't ask for, didn't even dare to imagine. Arrived in the most understated way. A single phone call. The kind that changes everything while sounding deceptively casual. It came from the community foundation Arthur once supported, a place Lila had admired since childhood. "Ms. Harper," the director said, "your name was recently added to a private donor fund established by Mr. Hawthorne before his passing. He believed in supporting entrepreneurs who showed both talent and integrity. The board reviewed your application and unanimously approved it." "My application?" Lila repeated, confused. "I didn't submit anything." "Oh, we know," the director said warmly. "Arthur submitted it for you." Lila's knees nearly gave out. Arthur. Arthur, who had seen her worth long before anyone else. Arthur, who had told her she was strong, talented, capable. Arthur, who had loved her like family when his actual family treated her like a stain. The director continued. You've been granted a full business development grant. Enough to expand your boutique to a second location, upgrade equipment, hire a small team, whatever you need. Lila pressed a trembling hand to her lips. But why me? She whispered. The director's answer was simple. Because he believed in people who rise with grace, even when they're pushed down. Something inside her broke open, not in pain, but in gratitude. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about status. This wasn't even about the Hawthornes. This was about justice delivered quietly. Exactly the way Arthur would have wanted. When she told Jonah, he didn't congratulate her like she'd won a competition. He didn't praise her like a miracle had repaired her life. He smiled softly and said, This isn't luck, Lila. This is the world finally catching up to who you've always been. And somehow, that meant more to her than the grant itself. He celebrated her success, not because it reflected well on him, but because it reflected the light she had rebuilt inside herself. A light he'd seen long before she believed it was still there. Days blended into weeks, and work blossomed beautifully. Lila hired her first assistant, a shy girl named Melody who adored textiles. She bought new machines. She repainted the shop. She added a fitting room with soft lighting and velvet curtains. Customers cried happy tears trying on dresses because Lila had a gift for making women feel worthy without changing who they were. And little by little, her life became the kind she once thought only belonged to other people. People richer. People luckier. People chosen. But now, she was one of them not because anyone handed her the role, but because she earned it stitch by stitch. The most unexpected reward, though? The dreams she had buried, dreams she once hid behind Arthur's mansion walls, began resurfacing. One evening, while sorting through old sketches, she found a page she didn't remember drawing. A bridal gown. Simple. Elegant. Honest. She stared at it for a long moment, feeling her breath catch. Wedding dresses had once symbolized humiliation for her. Shame. Escape. But now, they felt like possibility. And that, more than the boutique, more than the grant, more than the praise, was the truest sign that she had healed. A symbol of her greatest pain had become a symbol of her future again. Not because she needed a wedding, but because she no longer feared one. She touched the sketch gently and whispered, I think I'm ready to dream again. And, somewhere deep inside, she knew Arthur would have been proud. Very proud. Because his faith in her wasn't misplaced. She hadn't just survived the cruelty of his family. She had risen above it, without becoming bitter, without losing her softness, without surrendering her integrity. That kind of vindication? It shines longer than diamonds. While Lila's world softened, expanded, and slowly filled with dignity and purpose, the Hawthorne world began cracking. Not loudly. Not publicly at first. Downfalls rarely start with explosions. They begin quietly, like a structure rotting from the inside until one wrong touch makes everything collapse. And the Hawthornes? They had built their fortune on polished surfaces and rotten foundations. The first fracture appeared in the expected place. Adrian. The man who once mocked Lila's background, the same man who nearly humiliated her at the altar, began facing consequences he once believed he was immune to. It started at work. Adrian had always carried himself like someone born to lead, but without anyone noticing it, his father had been the real engine behind his success. When Edward Hawthorne passed, the company didn't magically transfer power to Adrian. It transferred responsibility, something he had never actually learned to carry. Meetings piled up. Deadlines slipped. Investors grew wary. One afternoon, his board advisor, a man who had watched Adrian since childhood, said quietly, You're not your father, Adrian. And the cracks are showing. Adrian snapped back, of course. But even his anger lacked weight now. It sounded thin, defensive, the voice of someone realizing he was no longer the strongest person in the room. And then came the rumor whispers. He's not capable. Edward held everything together. Adrian can't keep the company stable. Rumors he couldn't control, the exact thing he once used as a weapon against Lila. Life has an ironic sense of balance. The second fracture came from inside the family. The matriarch, Eleanor Hawthorne, had always walked with her chin lifted just enough to look above everyone else's flaws, except her own. She once dismissed Lila as the charity project who forgot her place. But now, people were avoiding her. Not out of fear. Out of exhaustion. Her social circle, the women she once commanded with a single raised brow, quietly began slipping away. Luncheons she hosted suddenly had conflicting events. Charity members forgot to include her on planning emails. A board she presided over voted to replace her for the sake of fresh leadership. Humiliations she had never tasted now arrived weekly. And the first time someone whispered at a gala, "Isn't she the mother-in-law who let her son bully that poor girl at the altar?" Eleanor nearly dropped her champagne flute. Because reputation was her lifeline, and Lila's quiet rise meant Eleanor's carefully curated image was crumbling. But the fracture that truly broke the family wasn't external. It came from a single document. The same type of document that, ironically, had almost stopped Lila's wedding a year earlier. A missing portion of Edward Hawthorne's estate file. When the attorneys finally contacted the family with the completed document, the one Lila had received notice about, Adrian and Eleanor arrived expecting control. Control of the will. Control of the assets. Control of the narrative. But the attorney merely handed them a sealed envelope and said, "There are updates your father requested shortly before his passing. You may want to prepare yourselves." Prepare themselves. 2 words that made Eleanor stiffen visibly. Inside the envelope was an addendum, handwritten, clear, and irreversible. Edward Hawthorne had chosen to redistribute a significant portion of his private discretionary funds away from the main family. Explicitly away. Instead, the funds had been directed toward a scholarship program, a community center, and, the part that turned Eleanor pale, support for the boutique and design endeavors of Lila Harper. She has integrity, vision, and the resilience our family has forgotten. The silence in the attorney's office was thick enough to choke on. Eleanor's fingers trembled. Adrian's face flushed red. The room seemed to tilt because for the first time, they were forced to confront a reality they had violently resisted. Edward Hawthorne had trusted Lila more than his own bloodline. And that was a truth they couldn't bury, couldn't twist, couldn't rewrite. The attorney continued calmly. Mr. Hawthorne believed she would use the funds with greater wisdom and compassion than anyone else in the family. Eleanor drew a sharp breath. Adrian's jaw clenched. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the symbolism. About being deemed unworthy by the man who built their empire. And about Lila, the girl they once called nothing. Being elevated, chosen, honored, trusted. It destroyed them slowly, thoroughly, the way truth always does to people who built their lives on pride. Adrian tried to hide it at first. He tightened his schedule. Tried to impress the board. Tried to regain the respect that had begun slipping through his fingers. But people could smell desperation. And every time his mind drifted back to Lila, to the moment he stood at the altar believing he was saving himself from a poor woman, his stomach twisted. Because now he understood something devastating. He hadn't rejected a liability. He had thrown away the best person who had ever loved him. And even worse, she didn't want him back. Not in apology. Not in forgiveness. Not in memory. She had moved on. She was rising. And the world, their world, was finally seeing the truth. The Hawthornes weren't the ones who made her worthy. She had always been worthy. Eleanor saw it too. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have a single weapon left to use. Because the downfall of the Hawthorne family wasn't caused by Lila. It was caused by their own arrogance. Lila simply chose not to sync with them. And nothing threatens proud people more than watching someone they tried to break rise higher than they ever imagined. Life has an unsettling habit of circling back to the places you least expect. And doing it at the exact moment you least want to be seen. For Lila, that moment arrived on a warm spring evening, wrapped in chandeliers and polished marble, exactly like the night she almost married into the Hawthorne family, yet nothing like it at all. This time, She wasn't there as a bride. She wasn't there as a charity case. She wasn't there as someone trying to fit into a world that had spit her out. She was there as a guest of honor. And trust me, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The event was the annual Hawthorne Foundation Gala, an evening the family used to flaunt power, wealth, and connections. Tickets were by invitation only, and for years, Lila never imagined she would hold one. But Arthur's estate attorney insisted. "Miss Harper," he said over the phone, "your presence is necessary. Edward intended for you to be part of this year's announcements." Part of the announcements. Oh, if only the Hawthornes knew what those announcements would entail. Mara insisted on doing Lila's hair. Jonah insisted on driving her. And Lila insisted on wearing a gown she designed herself, soft satin, deep emerald, with a structured bodice that whispered confidence without screaming for it. When she stepped out of the car, conversations quieted. Cameras turned. Eyes widened. Because she didn't look like the girl Adrian once abandoned at an altar. She looked like someone who had rebuilt herself from brokenness into elegance. Someone whole. Someone unshakable. And honestly, the Hawthornes never feared anything more. Inside the ballroom, everything glittered. Gold accents, towering floral arrangements, a string quartet playing elegant crescendos. But the real tension wasn't from the decor. It was from the whispers trailing behind Lila as she walked. "Is that her? The ex-fiancé? She looks incredible. I thought she disappeared." "No, she opened her own fashion line. Arthur adored her, you know." "Do the Hawthornes know she's here?" Oh, they knew. Eleanor Hawthorne spotted her first. Her spine straightened so sharply it was a miracle she didn't snap in half. She whispered something urgently to Adrian, who turned. And froze. Completely. Adrian stood beside the stage in a pristine black tuxedo, ready to deliver his speech. But when he saw Lila, elegant, calm, owning every inch of the room he once denied her, he forgot his entire opening line. His jaw tightened. His fingers flexed nervously. His eyes darted to the crowd, then back to her. Because Lila's presence wasn't a coincidence. It was a threat. A reminder. A reckoning wearing satin and grace. And the room felt it. Jonah stayed respectfully in the back, giving her space, but his gaze never left her, a quiet pillar of support. Mara, on the other hand, positioned herself directly behind Lila like a bodyguard with earrings. "You good?" Mara murmured. Lila inhaled slowly. "Yes." "Okay," Mara whispered. "Because Eleanor looks like she wants to set you on fire with her mind." Lila almost smiled. Almost. The lights dimmed. The music softened. And Adrian stepped up to the microphone, clearing his throat more times than necessary. "Welcome, everyone. We're honored to have you join us." His voice cracked. The crowd noticed. His mother noticed. He noticed that everyone noticed. Because his composure, the thing he prided himself on, was unraveling in real time. All because she was there. A woman he once believed he could discard like old lace. A woman who had risen far beyond his reach. Midway through his speech, the ballroom doors opened. A man entered quietly, not part of the staff, not a guest, wearing a tailored gray suit and carrying a black briefcase. Lila recognized him immediately. Arthur's private attorney. The same man who had told her the truth was almost ready to surface. He nodded at her once. Her stomach tightened. "Showtime." Adrian saw the attorney too. And his voice faltered. "Tonight, we celebrate a legacy." Legacy. Oh, the universe truly loved its poetic timing. The attorney approached the foot of the stage. Eleanor's face drained of color. Adrian's eyes widened. Several board members whispered frantically. The attorney lifted a sealed envelope, official, heavy, unmistakable. The entire room stilled. You could hear rings sliding on fingers. You could hear someone gasp. You could hear pride cracking like thin glass. The attorney spoke clearly, confidently, without apology. "Good evening. I'm here on behalf of the late Edward Hawthorne. There are matters regarding his estate that require public disclosure, as he specifically requested." Requested. Public disclosure. Adrian's grip tightened around the microphone. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came out. And the ballroom, filled with wealth, influence, and carefully crafted lies, suddenly felt smaller than a confession booth. The attorney continued. I will need Miss Lila Harper to join us at the front. Every head turned. Every whisper stopped. Every eye locked on her. But Lila didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She walked forward with steady steps, each one cutting through years of shame and rewriting her story. When she reached the stage, the attorney bowed his head respectfully. Thank you for being here, he said quietly. Adrian swallowed hard. Eleanor trembled. And the crowd leaned forward, desperate, hungry, terrified to hear what would come next. The envelope was placed on the podium. The attorney broke the seal with a clean, deliberate motion. And just before he spoke the first line of Edward's final revelation, a single thought echoed through the ballroom. Whatever comes next, it will change everything. There are silences that feel empty, and silences that feel like they're holding their breath. The ballroom fell into the second kind. 100 guests watched as the attorney unfolded a crisp document, one sealed by Edward Hawthorne himself. Under the chandelier's glow, it looked almost ceremonial. Sacred, even. Adrian shifted behind the podium, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Anyone paying attention could see it. The man who once smirked through life now looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff he didn't realize he'd built. Eleanor clutched the back of a chair. Her knuckles turned white. Her breath turned shallow. And Lila? She stood beside the attorney, calm and impossibly composed, not demanding anything, not dramatizing, not shaking. Just there. Strong. Present. Unshakable. Honestly, she didn't need a spotlight. Her calm was the spotlight. The attorney cleared his throat. This is the final personal addendum to the estate of Edward Hawthorne. Per his request, it is to be read in a public setting, witnessed by family, board members, and community representatives. You could practically hear Eleanor's composure cracking. Adrian managed a thin, strangled voice. This isn't necessary. My father never intended. The attorney lifted a hand. With respect, Mr. Hawthorne, he did. Adrian stepped back as if physically struck. The attorney began reading. To my family, staff, and the community I served. There are truths I wish to make clear before they are rewritten by pride or convenience. A ripple went through the audience. Eleanor's eyes widened. Adrian looked down. The attorney continued. First, regarding Miss Lila Harper. I wish it known that she was never a burden, never an opportunist, and never the cause of any division within this family. The hostility she faced came from prejudice, not truth. Gasps. Actual gasps. Someone whispered loudly. So the rumors were lies? Another murmured. He's calling out his own family. Eleanor swayed slightly. Mara, from the back, whispered. Well, that's what happens when you build your personality on being insupportable. Secondly, the attorney read, I entrusted Miss Harper with private documents, business drafts, and philanthropic plans because she demonstrated integrity beyond what I have seen, even within my own bloodline. Adrian's head snapped upward. It hit him like a blow. Arthur's faith in Lila had always been greater than his faith in his own son. And everyone in that ballroom saw it. But the real earthquake came next. The attorney set down the first page and lifted a second. This one handwritten. Simpler. More emotional. As for the Hawthorne Foundation, Miss Harper is to be recognized as co-creator of the community development program she helped me design. Eleanor's mouth fell open. She what? She whispered. But the attorney wasn't done. I direct that she be granted authority to finalize the project, access its allocated funds, and oversee its implementation. Her vision reflects the legacy I want to leave behind. A buzz of whispers swept across the ballroom. What? She's part of the foundation? She's involved in the project? She was the one helping Edward all along? It was the social equivalent of thunder. But then, the lightning struck. The attorney reached into his briefcase and pulled out yet another document, this one sealed with a golden embossed crest. Lastly, he said, pausing long enough for the entire ballroom to lean closer. I address the matter of my son's wedding. Oh yes. He went there. Adrian's face drained completely of color. The room froze again. The accusations against Miss Harper were false, baseless, and rooted in arrogance I hoped my son would eventually outgrow. A woman in the back whispered, "He's exposing his own child at his funeral." Another muttered, "Not exposing, correcting." The attorney read on. I admired Lila for walking away rather than allowing herself to be humiliated. Now that line? That hit like a glass shattering. Guests turned toward Lila. But she stayed still, quiet, dignified. The attorney finished the paragraph. And, because truth matters more than comfort, I recorded, in writing, the real reason the wedding collapsed. Adrian's breathing hitched. Here it came. The moment the Hawthorne family had prayed would stay buried. The attorney looked at Adrian, then at the crowd, then back at the page. The Hawthornes feared she wasn't worthy, but I feared my son wasn't. The room erupted. A collective gasp. Murmurs. Shouts. Cell phones coming up. People sitting forward in their seats. Eleanor clapped a hand over her mouth. Adrian stepped back like the words had physically hit him. And Lila didn't move. Not because she wasn't affected, but because she didn't need to do anything. The truth was fighting the battle for her. But the most devastating sentence, the one that ended Adrian's entire narrative, was the last line of the addendum. Miss Harper was the most sincere, loyal, and honest person in that church. My only regret is that I allowed my family's pride to wound someone who deserved far better than us. Silence. Total, gutted silence. Even the chandeliers seemed to pause. Everyone looked at Lila, not with pity, not with mockery, but with respect. And Adrian? His voice cracked as he whispered, "Lila, I didn't know but he didn't get to finish." Because the attorney stepped aside. And Lila finally spoke. Her voice calm, steady, clear. "Adrian, your father didn't write this to destroy you. He wrote it because he wanted the truth to breathe. I didn't come here to shame you. I came because he asked me to stand for what we built, not what you broke." The room held its breath. Her next line was the softest blow of all. "I don't hate you. I just don't belong to your world anymore." And honestly, that sentence hurt him more than any curse ever could. But there was one more twist. One no one expected. The attorney lifted yet another page. "A final clause," he said, "directed specifically to Miss Harper and Mr. Adrian Hawthorne." Adrian blinked. Lila frowned. The room leaned forward. The attorney read, "If Miss Harper chooses, she may take legal ownership of the project land originally promised during the engagement. This decision is hers alone. Adrian has no authority in this matter." Eleanor whispered hoarsely, "He gave her the land?" "The Hawthorne land." Mara slapped a hand over her heart dramatically. Jonah exhaled quietly behind the crowd, eyes soft but proud. "And Adrian." He dropped the microphone. Literally. It clattered across the stage with a metallic echo. Because that was the moment the full truth hit him. He hadn't only lost a fiancé. He had lost the future his father had wished for him. Lila hadn't ruined his life. He had ruined his own. And now the entire ballroom knew it. The attorney closed the folder. The lights buzzed faintly. And the room, stunned, breathless, waited for whatever would happen next. The ballroom emptied slowly, not with the glamorous drift of a gala ending, but with the uneasy hush of people leaving a crime scene. Because that night had been won, in a way. Not a crime of violence, but a crime of pride unraveling in public. Guests whispered as they slipped out the doors. "I never knew Edward favored her. That poor girl, no, she handled it with grace. He exposed his own family like that? Well, someone had to." No one, not one person, left thinking of Lila as the naive girl Adrian once dismissed. If anything, Adrian became the cautionary tale. She became the example. Lila stepped outside into the cool night air, finally allowing her shoulders to relax. The weight of years, accusation, humiliation, abandonment, slipped off her like a shawl she didn't need anymore. Jonah approached from a few steps away. He didn't rush to her. He didn't smother her with concern. He simply came close enough to be there. "You all right?" he asked softly. Lila exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the entire ballroom with it. "Yes," she said. "More than all right." Jonah nodded once, proud, relieved, quietly shaken in his own way. "You were extraordinary," he said. Lila looked out across the parking lot, cars leaving, people murmuring, and shook her head gently. "I just told the truth," she whispered. He smiled. "No, you stood in it." For a moment they walked in silence. Crickets hummed nearby. Warm lights flickered from the building. Her heels clicked softly against the stone. Then he stopped. "Lila." He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect. "I know tonight was about closure. Not about us." Her heart beat a little faster. He continued. "I just want you to know, no matter what you choose, no matter where this takes you, I'm here. Not because you need me, but because you deserve someone who shows up without expecting anything in return." The gentleness of it almost unraveled her more than all the drama inside that ballroom. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed her hand slowly, intentionally on his. "I know," she whispered. "And that's why I'm not afraid anymore." Jonah's shoulders eased. Sometimes relief is louder than pride. Back inside, the Hawthornes faced a very different ending. In a private room away from the guests, Eleanor stood rigidly near the mantel, trembling with barely contained humiliation. "How dare he do this?" she whispered. Her voice cracked, sharp, brittle, chipped with disbelief. Adrian didn't answer. He sat on a sofa, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. Not in theatrics. Not in self-pity. Just silent collapse. The kind that comes only after the truth finally catches a man who ran from it too long. Eleanor continued pacing. "He destroyed our name. He destroyed everything we built. He—" "No," Adrian finally said, lifting his head. His voice sounded different, scraped raw, stripped of arrogance. "He didn't destroy anything. We did." Eleanor snapped toward him. "What are you talking about?" Adrian stood slowly, every movement heavy with the realization that had gutted him all night. "We lied," he said quietly. "We bullied. We looked down on her. We blamed her. And she was the only honest one among us." Eleanor stiffened. "That girl. That woman," Adrian interrupted, his voice firmer. "She's a better Hawthorne than any of us ever were." Silence cut through the room. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, trembling not with anger, but with the fear of losing control. "You still love her," she whispered. Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. Regret sat on his shoulders like a cloak he'd never be free from. Outside, Lila and Jonah reached her car. But before she opened the door, Mara came rushing out of the building like a storm in heels. "Lila. Oh my goodness, I." She flailed her arms dramatically. "You were a goddess. A queen. A meteor made of pure justice." Lila laughed, truly laughed, and hugged her friend tightly. It felt good to laugh again. It felt even better to laugh because she wasn't surviving, she was living. Mara pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," I could scream. "You already are screaming," Jonah muttered. Let me have this," Mara snapped, then instantly softened. "You did it, Lila. You finally walked back into the Hawthorne world and walked out untouched." Lila shook her head gently. "No. I walked out untouched a long time ago. Tonight everyone else finally saw it." Later that night, when the noise faded and she was finally home, Lila slipped off her shoes and stood barefoot in the middle of her small living room. Quiet. Still. Free. She placed the envelope, the addendum Arthur wrote, on her coffee table. Not with fear. Not with anger. But with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, as if he could still hear her. "Not for choosing me. Not for defending me. But for reminding me who I was when I forgot." Outside, the city hummed softly. Inside, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in years. A door closing. Gently. Finally. Completely. And somewhere deep in her chest, another door opened. A door toward whatever comes next. A future no longer shaped by the Hawthorne's pride, but by her own peace. Some people spend their whole lives trying to look powerful. Others spend their lives trying to be powerful. But the rare few, the ones who change rooms without raising their voice, simply learn to stand in their truth. Lila didn't win because the Hawthorns lost. She won because she stopped handing other people the pen that wrote her worth. Walking away wasn't weakness. Silence wasn't surrender. And grace wasn't naivety. It was strength, the quiet kind, the kind that rebuilds a life instead of destroying one. That's the real lesson here. You can survive humiliation, betrayal, pride, judgment, and still rise with gentleness. Because when truth finally comes to light, and it always does, those who tried to bury you end up buried by their own lies. And you? You get to bloom in peace. If you want more wedding drama, family secrets, and stories that make you whisper, "No way," hit subscribe. Bridal Confessions has many more secrets to tell.